Welcome back, everyone, to another one-on-one with Jerry Hall. Today's conversation is with a Twitter favorite of mine. It's Crypto Adam. This is an actually very interesting young man. Like me, he left his home country to seek life abroad. Now, he transplanted himself from Australia and he's now living in the Pacific Northwest. Yeah, he's in Oregon. So, I mean, he's a fascinating guy. Talk about a guy he's interested in he's training for American Ninja Warrior. Obviously, he's into crypto. He's a techno geek in a way. He and his wife are hunkering in, and he's going to share his story. And that story's coming at you right now. So, Adam, thank you so much for taking the time to join me today. How are you and your family where you are?
We're really good. Thank you very much for having me, Jerry. I'm very excited. So we're in the Pacific Northwest of Oregon. And so we're living in the forest. We're very happy where we are. Yeah, everything is going really well. I've been in quarantine since March, and even though it's hard, I do actually kind of enjoy it. Like, I get to work on all my various projects. I get to work out a lot. I've taken, a whole lot of commuting time out of my day.
Right.
So yeah, I'm really enjoying it, but I also understand lots of people are really struggling, and it's definitely a difficult time for everybody.
Well,
How are you going?
I'm down here in Costa Rica, and although Costa Rica has addressed the COVID pandemic differently than other places, there's obviously knock-on effects. Anytime a country like mine here that has been so predominantly dependent as part of their GDP on tourism, having a
Yeah.
global lockdown, squelches a lot of that economic activity. And so we had this event, and I'll just share it with you really quick because I found it very interesting. I'm seeing protests in anger and people getting hurt from these clips on Twitter that I see about things going on in the United States.
Yeah.
Well, here in Costa Rica, we just had a major countrywide protest by the citizens, and they were protesting the president of Costa Rica seeking a loan from the IMF to
Okay.
handle shortfalls with the tourists not showing up. Okay, fine. How they protest, they don't go out and loot things. They don't smash windows and hurt people. What they do is they throw parties on major highways. So they
Oh,
literally
so it stops the traffic.
they shut the country down in an indirect but direct way. And there's these parties in the streets, and it's amazing. I mean, the police don't come with riot gear and break them up. They,
Yeah.
just basically are trying to create shortcuts or ends around how traffic can continue to flow. But you'll see, like here in my province, there was probably from my side about a 5 miles of semi trucks just backed up.
Right. So it actually affects all the logistics, the supply chains, like all
Oh,
that sort of stuff.
it,
Everyone's
it will
affected by
get
these
people's
parties.
attention. Yes, it gets
Yeah.
people's
Yeah.
attention. But nobody's hurt, nobody's shot, nobody's
Yeah.
arrested.
That's
Their
great.
voices being so it's interesting to see how the world is handling this. Obviously, you're doing well in Oregon, and I think that's wonderful. I saw you were really active this morning on Twitter, and I was curious your thoughts on kind of some of the events that have happened this year. We have the OCC letter. We've seen publicly traded companies putting crypto assets on their balance sheet. We're seeing large, well-known household name payment facilitators like PayPal coming out and saying, okay, we're going to, facilitate cryptocurrency in one way, shape, or form. You've been in the industry for a bit. I'd love to get your take on some of these incredible developments that you've seen while you're in quarantine doing your life.
Yeah, so I think it's kind of amazing, but also there are some alarming signs as well. So I think a lot of it comes down to inflation. So I was reading an article recently that said the potential real inflation of the USD might be closer to 18-20%, which is obviously massive. And that comes down to actual purchasing power. And so I think a lot of these big companies taking on Bitcoin is kind of their hedge. They're not putting 50% of their capital in, or, it's still a smaller amount, but it's really to hedge against that inflation. And obviously, Bitcoin isn't being seen as the volatile, risky asset that it was 2 years ago, where prices were changing, every couple of months. So yeah, it has been really interesting. My personal background is that I kind of got into the crypto space because I am Australian, but I've moved to the US, and it became really difficult to get access to my own money in Australia because the Australian banks and the US banks weren't really talking to each other. So I had situations where, people or banks were recommending that I just quickly fly down to Australia to sign a piece of paper and fly back. It's a 15-hour flight. Like that is a whole week of my time just to sign a piece of paper in this day and age where obviously, digital signatures are pretty easy. And that's kind of how I got into crypto. Like there has to be a better way to move money across borders. And the more I looked into it, the more I saw that, there is so much potential for areas that don't get capital very easily to suddenly get access to capital extremely easily. So yeah, I do think the world is changing for the better in terms of moving value around. I'm a little bit excited and nervous about PayPal, just because I think that is a really good opportunity for people to get exposure to cryptocurrency. But I think the PayPal model seems a little bit dangerous in terms of I'm not sure that they're actually allowing people to buy Bitcoin. I think they're essentially allowing people to write an IOU for Bitcoin, which they purchase and hold themselves. So I would love to see a lot more transparency in that. Are the people that use PayPal to buy Bitcoin that are actually buying their own Bitcoin? But in terms of advertising cryptocurrency, I think this is a great move. And it feels like we're getting past the tipping point of cryptocurrency only being for crime and actually being of value to the world. So yeah, I'm excited with a lot of this. I'm a little bit cautious, but I think generally we're trending in the right direction.
No, and I agree. One of the things I found really interesting, specifically as it pertained to developments this year with Ripple getting in bed with MoneyGram and PayPal getting in bed with basically proof of work cryptocurrencies, is that
Yeah.
these particular businesses, right, their entire business model is being the middleman between you and I having a transaction.
Right.
And cryptocurrencies, right, at their core, it doesn't matter if it's BTC or Litecoin or XRP or whatever, at their core, they eliminate the need for a middleman. And so I found that very interesting. And I think to myself, as wonderful as it is to create exposure to, I would say, add a little bit of credibility to it from a perspective of folks that know nothing about it. Obviously, publicly traded companies have a level of trust, especially if they've been around for a little bit. Getting in bed with these actual technologies that are truly at their core meant to displace them.
Right, which is fascinating, right? Like
it is.
It's so interesting, yeah. And I kind of think, for the PayPals, this was kind of the direction they had to go in, because they could be replaced. If someone else has a better model, you either take that on or you die, or you kind of market and regulate and all that sort of stuff. Yeah, it is very interesting. And we're still not at the stage where I can easily spend cryptocurrency at the grocery store.
Right.
I think that is the next step. But obviously a lot needs to happen. I kind of see cryptocurrency as being a 10, 20-year journey rather than a 1 or 2 year journey.
Oh,
These things
absolutely.
take time,
Absolutely.
especially when companies have their vested interests in keeping you kind of trapped within their ecosystem. That's, PayPal might make things harder on the way of making things easier.
Sure, sure. So I was watching this interview that plays in this response plays right into to where we're going with this. And it was with Tom Lee from Fundstrat. It was on Real Vision with Ash Bennington. And one of the little nuggets that came out of it was this, that the banking element of financial markets is predicated on 4% of the individual participants' income to utilize. So what that means in English is, for me to participate in the banking system, it costs me 4% of my income per year.
In fees?
Oh yeah, yeah.
Right.
In
Okay.
fees.
Right.
Which
Yeah.
loosely translated to, if you broke down a percentage of 4% into 365 days, it's 15 days a year that
Right.
we work just to participate in a monetary system through the banks.
Yeah.
And again, crypto at its core presents a disruption of all of that. And so, who's going to come up with the best user interface app for people to utilize these things? Are national tax entities, like in the United States, it's the IRS, going to penalize it as it is now, or will more favorable law get created so that, yes, we could literally use these assets to buy bread if we want to, without being crushed by a capital gains or a this or a that? Those are things that are obviously going to get worked out over the years. But it's really interesting. Why do you have your aha moment with crypto? It's like, oh, okay, and then boom, your wallet opened and you started investing. I'd love to hear that story.
Yeah, so I actually did. So I tend to play around with different blockchains. I really want to learn as much as I can about the industry as a whole. And so I was playing with a blockchain called Steam, which is now terrible and has moved to Hive, but that's a fascinating story in itself. But what I found is that I could send value to someone in Venezuela and they received it within 3 seconds, but I couldn't send money to my own partner in the same room because we were both using US Bank, and US Bank had this whole thing and it took a couple of days. So for me to it was quicker for me to go out in the car to an ATM, withdraw the money, give it to my partner so that she then had it, but then she had to put it into her bank, or I could just send it and 3 seconds later it's in the wallet of this person in Venezuela. Like, that is incredible. So that was kind of my aha moment. That was when I realized this is a superior, better technology. We just kind of need to help people understand it, and we need to help people actually use it. And so, I'm not sure if you know, but I've built a little application that I'm really trying to use to help people learn about blockchain and cryptocurrency. So it's a website called gfam.live. And what it is, it's very simple. So people can put a little story and a little photo, and then you can tip them in XRP. And so wherever they are in the world, they get that XRP within 3 seconds or 5 seconds or whatever it is. And the really interesting thing is that I've used people's services to help me build this. So, I paid like a designer and a logo guy through PayPal. And through PayPal, I have to pay all these fees. I have to pay like exchange rates and stuff. But on my own website, I don't have to pay any of that. I don't pay any network fees or anything. And the person gets the value straight away. So it's been really interesting building this little application and seeing the differences while I'm building it. Yeah, and that's why, you know, I do put a lot of faith in the blockchain and cryptocurrency world. And I really think like we haven't seen what this industry will bring yet. I would love a little peek 10 years into the future because I think it will look nothing like how it looks now.
Well, the
It's really
iteration,
exciting.
right? I agree. What will actually be deemed valuable and useful in 10 years is hard to identify. But what
Right.
isn't hard to identify, matter of fact, it's very easy to see, is the trend, right? The trend is going, value has historically always gone to better, faster, cheaper.
Yes.
All right.
Mostly.
Now, listening to your story about the app, and I think that is wonderful, and I really want to commend you on two parts. One, the ingenuity, right? But probably more importantly, the desire to roll up your sleeves, because I am absolutely certain, without you even telling me, that the learning curve for you to be able to do that was much higher than most of your daily activities.
Right. Yeah,
Right.
I've had to learn a ton. I'd never really understood the difference between payments and settlements, for example. That's, you know, there's a huge amount just in that little piece of the puzzle.
Right.
The whole idea of trust and trustless systems. I guess I understood it at a fundamental level, but when you actually see it in action,
Uh-huh.
um, transferring value, how does the value get from me to you, and who do we trust to get it there? Like if you've ever bought something, I don't know, off like Craigslist or whatever, there is that awkward situation of like, when do you send the money? Do you want to see the thing before you buy it? If that's not possible, do you send the money and then they send the product? Like, trusting people is really hard, especially if you don't
Sure.
know them. And blockchain fixes that
Well,
entire dynamic.
and the element of the same exact scenario, you're buying something on Craigslist. Let's say it's a relatively large ticket item, something over a couple $100.
Yeah.
Meeting somebody somewhere to exchange the item and dollars. I did this with a car once. I bought a car off of Craigslist.
Yeah.
And I was actually very nervous with
Yeah.
$8,000 of cash in my pocket, meeting somebody who I did not know.
Yep.
I mean, we did it in a public grocery store parking lot,
Of
very
course.
visible
But it's
during the
still,
day, but
yeah.
still, I mean, still. And so one of the things I found really interesting, and I'll tell you my little story about a picture's worth 1,000 words, so to speak. I had a buddy, has been retired 10 or 12 years, and he's my age. Did very well in business, sold his business for millions upon millions of dollars.
Awesome.
He does his own little investing, right? He's his own investment manager. And I was telling him about the cryptocurrency industry that I was getting into as I was exiting the equities markets into this market.
Yeah.
And I was trying to present the value proposition. Well, he lives in the United States. And I said, okay, so when you go to your TD Ameritrade account or your Fidelity account or your Schwab account, how long does it take you to fund that account and actually start trading? Well, 3 days. Okay, great. When you sell something, how long does it take you before you have access to the capital? 3 days. Okay, great. You got a phone, cell phone? Of course I do. Okay. Took 2 seconds to fire up an XRP tip bot.
Yep.
On his phone, and another 4.5 minutes to start an Uphold account.
Yeah.
And I said, okay, listen, you bought dinner last night. You said it was on you, but I want to contribute half. So pull up your phone. Just look at the screen. It was black, obviously. And I got on the tip bot and I went, da 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 da. I sent him 25 XRP. The count of 4 in my head, boom, he got an alert on his phone. He just got 25 XRP from
Right.
at jerryvhall1, right? And I said, okay, you have options now. You can leave that in that digital form, but how do you want to settle it in? Do you want it in the form of US dollars? Do you want this digital asset? And he goes, I want dollars. Always want dollars. I said, okay, great.
Sure.
Go to
Yeah.
your Uphold account. Okay, great. He's got 2 apps open on his phone. He's shuffling back and forth. I said, okay, now direct here, cutting, you're going to copy and paste this address. Boom, put it in there. Boom. Now press send, send. Now all you got to do is convert it. And he did. He converted it into a stable coin.
Oh, did he? Okay.
And it's still sitting there on Uphold. I mean, it was, $1.50 or $2 or whatever it was. The point was, he was able to very quickly see that value could be transmitted fast, cheap, and securely, and then mutated into whatever form he wanted. He had access to buying gold. He had access to buying other national currencies. He had access to other digital assets.
So then take that same story and apply it to a grocery store who can receive value within 4 seconds and then buy supplies, where at the moment, like if you pay with a credit card, you take the items and then 4 days later they get their money from the credit card after they've paid a huge amount in fees.
Right.
And then they can purchase products. So like I am kind of surprised that retail hasn't embraced crypto really quickly, but I also understand they want to see how the regulations fall out. And where the price goes up and down, that must be a little bit scary for retailers. Like they don't want 25 XRP that's worth, like $5 or whatever, for that then to be worth $4 a day later. So, I understand there's a lot of maturity to come to the market, but clearly 5 minutes, and now, your friend is completely set up with Uphold and Tipbot and whatever. So now that's only 5 seconds between when you send him the value and he receives it, and then he can do what he wants, as opposed to 8 business days, if you count it, when he sends the value and then when someone can actually use that value. And
that was the aha for him
internationally.
Yeah, that was the aha for him, because I could see the wheels turning. He was like,
yeah.
Now, has he made any investments in crypto? No. He's perfectly happy doing what he's doing. And that's totally okay. It's like sometimes you just plant a seed and you move on. You don't need to stand there and watch it grow. It'll either grow on its own or it won't.
And that he might not really fully understand until he comes to another country and sees that exact same process is identical, regardless of where his things are and where their things are, as opposed to the PayPal, where you have to pay their exchange rates based on whatever they think it is, plus their fees. So, PayPal makes money both ways. So yeah, I mean, there's a lot of things to be excited about in this industry. Unfortunately, I think, there are some areas that need to work on their regulation before we get kind of that retail adoption in terms of like actual stores and actual suppliers and all that sort of stuff.
Sure.
But you can see that it's moving.
Well, one of the other elements that I'll tell you that I thought was really fascinating about you, and I've had several guests on that I've been able to talk about this with, is the entire process or theme of repatriating yourself to another country.
Right.
What that's like. I mean, so many of us spend our entire lives in one region, with maybe occasional week vacations somewhere else. But generally, those are always in a tourist type context, and tourism and actual culture of a country are two totally different things.
Right. But you're in Costa Rica now, and I imagine you weren't born in Costa Rica.
No.
Right. So you've gone through this process yourself to a country that doesn't predominantly speak English, and a country that works on a different timetable than areas of the US. But
Yes.
it is extremely difficult, as I'm sure you found. We very much struggled, especially initially, because even though in Australia, like, had really good jobs, we owned property, and then you come to America and you have zero credit score, even though, I think 35 years old, like, we were established people, but the US doesn't recognize that. And so, like, we couldn't get mobile phones initially. We couldn't get credit cards. We had to give the bank money and they would give us a credit card of that same amount. And it took probably 2 years for us to get like a credit score established. And now we're fine. But 2 years, like, that's a long time before you can really make major purchases. And so I understand the credit score system in America, but it also must be holding them back in a lot of different ways because it's so hard for people to repatriate. Like, it is. We did it for the adventure. Australia is super multicultural, and I'm from a city called Melbourne that is very multicultural. There's people from all over the world there, and it's amazing and it's exciting, and you get to meet so many different people from so many different cultures. So much so that we felt a little bit boring. It's like, oh, we've got to get out there because all our friends are from somewhere else. And so it's been a fascinating journey coming to America. And I'm not super sure that we would want to retire here just because there are some structural and fundamental issues with this country that, needs to be sorted out. But I really love the country, so it does make it difficult. But yeah, I mean, that process of movement is really, really hard, and I hope it gets a lot easier. And I'm really excited to see countries like Barbados offering like a work from home visa for a year for people to just come and work remotely. Like, that's such a clever idea, and I hope more countries do that, because if people work remotely, then that kind of opens up the world, and so people can explore. And when you explore, you get different viewpoints, and hopefully that opens your worldview to other types of people, I guess, which I think is part of the division in America. People aren't understanding each other.
Right, right. What's really interesting, and I found this to be true personally, that going to another country, whether it's basically the same language or not, the sheer diversity in the environment, the way things are done, the economies, the laws, forces you to relearn things. And one of the elements that I've been very keen to and seeing happen time and time and time again throughout my life is, as we get older, if we are not continuing to learn new things, that there is a bit of a dulling of the mind that happens. And so to be in a new environment with, new cultural traits and practices, even just the vernacular. You know what I mean? This just, you're forced to learn. It's not you cannot deny it. So you just accept it. And with that acceptance comes, okay, I've got to do this and I got to learn this. Like you were talking about your credit and being able to interact in the financial element of your, new home in America. With very little tools. And you had to learn how to acquire those tools so that you could put them to work. Same here in Costa Rica for me.
And I love the idea that people are moving to Costa Rica or Mexico to retire and experiencing this whole new different life from what they've experienced prior. Like, I think that's great. I really like that aspect. I kind of think, unfortunately, it's because of America's healthcare or living expenses or all that sort of stuff. Like, people are almost forced to do that at times. But I love that people are exposed to a whole new culture and, just learning the language or learning the different things. Like, it really does expand your mind and obviously helps you think. Like, I think lots of people are really worried that once they retire, like, they'll get sick because they'll lose like that purpose of their job. But it's not true at all. There's so much to learn that, you know, you could never get tired if you're excited to learn new things.
Well, I fall into that category. I have a thirst for learning that, well, it's led me to this conclusion. Youth is wasted on the young.
Yes. And I remember like feeling that when I was younger. Like I was very aware that like I was like mentally really sharp. My body was amazing. I could like jump off the roof and be fine. I had all these advantages, but I couldn't do anything. So I had no financial, you know, anything. I had no transportation. Like I couldn't do the things I wanted to do because there were all these constraints. But I knew that like my body and my mind were probably the best they were going to be. So I think when people hit like their mid-20s, their mid-30s, like they're just really starting to become the person that they want to be. Yeah, it is funny, like to be young again, right? But also I wouldn't want to be a teenager again. It'd be awful. Yeah, I'm really interested with what it must be like to be a teenager now compared to when we were teenagers. Like the world has changed so much in 20, 30 years. It's incomprehensible to me. Like it must be really difficult to be growing up now.
Well, I don't know if it's, you know, I'd even widen that. How's that? I'd even widen that. It's hard to live now, given this particular premise, and I'll just set the premise. We live in an economic world, right, where value is transmitted and transferred whether you like it or not. You have to have water, you have to have food, shelter is extremely important, and those things have a value to them. They are not freely given, or generally access is free. Okay, so with that being said, you have to become an economic player to participate in the world, and it's very difficult to not participate in the world. Very few places left where you can just go live off the wild.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah,
okay,
absolutely.
So with that being said, it doesn't matter if you're 15 or 35. The truth of the matter is public education, whether it be in Australia, the United States, or Costa Rica, and I'm talking about kindergartens, grade schools, junior highs, junior colleges, even state level universities, etc. They don't teach financial education. They don't teach financial literacy. They don't teach the principles of wealth building. What they do teach and support are things like, this is how you manage a checking account. This is how you take on debt. This is how you should budget your life. Well, all those models are built to support a system that is about consumerism, right? Become an economic player where your energy is turned into currency units. You use your currency units to buy things, and you use, whether it be secured or unsecured means, you use yourself in the future, your future prosperity, to get something today that you would have had to wait for till a later date. And that's expansion through debt. That is the culture we're taught. And like I said, it doesn't matter, Australia, Costa Rica, United States, it's permeated the planet, and it's really created a wealth divide. And people are frustrated and they don't understand that it's not a Republican thing or a Democrat thing. It's not a Muslim thing or a Catholic or Christian thing. It's an economic thing. And if we all increased our financial literacy and our understanding of how value is transmitted and works, how monetary policy is created and implemented, and what's available for us to use or not use, I think a lot of the strife in the world would start to subside, because people could become more responsible for themselves as opposed to making the government responsible for them.
Yeah, I don't know where I got this, but I've always been fairly terrified of credit. So I've always been really worried about being in credit and having, money owed at the end of the month. But a lot of my friends have not had that issue. Like, they're happy to buy the thing that they want now and worry about it later. And yeah, so it is kind of amazing to see so many people in so much debt. And I completely agree. Like, if there was better education about financial literacy, I think I've kind of been lucky. I don't know why I'm scared of credit, but I'm glad that I have been. But yeah, I think that kind of education, especially in middle school and high school, would probably put the world in a much better place, even though we wouldn't be buying so much surplus stuff. Like, I think, especially with the pandemic, but I'm also super worried about automation and what that will mean for people's future careers. I think a lot of not so highly skilled jobs will be replaced by automation, but also a lot of like white collar jobs will be replaced by a different type of automation. And I can definitely see that in corporations now. What does that mean for people's futures? How will they get value in order to buy the things they need, like water, shelter, and food? Yeah, like, again, the world is going to change so much in the future, and I just can't see what that's going to be like. How are people going to live? I'm just not really sure. Do you, like, how do you think things are going to go, especially as?
I think people will evolve.
Okay.
I'll tell you,
I hope
here's
so.
the thing. Here's like maybe a very bad example, but for instance, if I was living in a world where there were tigers and bears and things that could eat me and wanted to eat me, and that was their job, I would probably put a lot of time and effort into becoming a better runner than the other people around me.
You don't
Okay?
need to be the fastest runner.
I just have to be faster than you. And that's kind of silly and kind of cute and funny and all that, but the thing is true. We evolve. People evolve, right? And so if the marketplace for labor, that today might be manufacturing, tomorrow could be something else, and people can relearn.
Yeah.
But again, back to if we learned how to use money as a vehicle to earn money,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Then there would be less relevance or importance placed on a specific kind of way. So my job as a bus driver that could be displaced by autonomous buses,
Yeah.
if that were to come about, but I knew how to live fiscally responsible. I knew how to invest and how to look for return, right? If the one thing isn't doing it anymore, then I can move that capital into something else that's doing it. Then the harm that's that's thrust upon me by this dislocation of employment gives, it's not the end of the world.
Right.
My
But what if
lifestyle might change
you,
a little bit
yeah,
while I
but
re-educate or retrain myself to something else that does have an income associated with it.
yeah, and I definitely think you're right there. I think people move in areas, that can't be replaced by automation, or they're looking after the automation. My concerns are that we have a huge amount of people around the world that are in debt. And
Mm,
so that process of being replaced means they can't allocate equity to, creating, making money with their money because they're already in debt. And so that, like, I do find that really scary. And I guess coming back to my little pet project, like, I think things like telling stories or sharing your experiences can't ever really be replaced by automation. And if we
right.
find ourselves in a world where, we're just not working that much because there isn't work for us to do, then, sharing stories with each other, sharing experiences, or really just getting to know each other might be how we get income to survive. If I tell a really good story and people really like it and I get, XRP tips or whatever, maybe that's how I can derive value in order to purchase water and food. So yeah, I mean, I don't know how things are going to go. I hope people evolve. I hope people don't, get displaced. But yeah, I'm hoping to help build the future that might be post-automation.
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, I can tell you,
it's definitely interesting.
It's an absolute guarantee there will be a ton of displacement. There will be.
Yes.
But I also believe
we're already seeing it.
Yeah, it's already there. So that we'll just write that in the books as a truth. I think also what you will see is a tremendous amount of shifting or changing of the quote unquote ideal, right? What the ideal is. Now, I can't speak for you being raised in Australia, but I'll tell you my experience. Growing up, I was born in 65, so my worldview or how I saw things and interpreted things really was being developed through the 70s and the 80s. And at that time, the prevailing aspiration was move out of the house, make enough money to have your own house, have your own car, have your own stuff, and be a little like independent entity. Well, I come down here to Costa Rica and I see a culture that is far more family oriented. In other words, multi-generations in one home. Now, culturally, there are a lot of reasons for that, but what are actual tangible takeaways from that? Well, each person in the home has a lower requirement for earning because the overall overhead to manage one home with 4 people in it is far less than 4 homes. And you can extrapolate that down through all of the what we would call the commerce tree. So homes, cars, furniture, the need for stuff is diminished. If the need for stuff is diminished and more of it or a larger percentage of it is for everyday survival stuff, your water, your food, obviously electricity, these type of things, then you can go, if there's less need for larger amounts of money, then access or availability to acquire smaller amounts of money are the way to go, because people kind of always seem to choose the easiest path. Right. So I think we're in for what was Australia like growing up for you? What were you kind of presented with as what the ideal Australian lifestyle was going to be as you were going up through school and about to get out of school and have your own life? What were those? What did you aspire to?
Well, that's a really interesting question itself, because Australia being so multicultural, I had different aspirations to my really close friends. And my really close friends, they were Croatian or Italian or Greek. And so their parents had more that family-oriented approach, in that no one's leaving home until they're married. The grandparents live with us. The grandparents can look after the kids while the parents are at work. It's its own little ecosystem where, being Australian, Caucasian, it was more, similar model to you in terms of you basically you stay at home until you finish university. And then once you've saved up a little bit, you then move out. And I personally had to move out a little bit earlier than that. And so, there is a little bit of regret there that I wasn't able to earn enough money to save up a deposit for a house once I moved out of home. And so I think that set me back maybe a decade. But essentially, it's a very different model. But I was seeing different models around me. And then as I went through university, there were a lot more of my friends were from Asian countries that had a very similar approach to a lot of the Mediterranean countries. And so, it is really interesting. And I kind of think that family model is superior and works out better for everyone. But it is interesting that, I just want to move out as soon as possible and get my own place and have my own life. And, a lot of my friends from these different cultures also feel really oppressed. They, you know, everyone had like a midnight curfew that was really annoying when we're all going out, because their parents were a lot more strict. The girls in a lot of these cultures couldn't do the occupations that they wanted to do because their parents just expected them to have kids. You know, so many of my friends were told they didn't even need an education because they were just going to be housewives. You know, like such a different cultural difference. But yeah, I wish that in school I had been taught about investment and approaching even just purchasing a house a lot more differently. You know, like I think it's really important for people to try and pay off their house as soon as possible, if they even want to purchase real estate, which in Australia it's kind of a given, like everyone will buy their own house. And I think now it's just not even as possible for a lot of the younger generations because house prices are so expensive. People are now starting to rethink that. We're definitely finding, you know, 45-year-olds still living at home with their parents because there just isn't the opportunity to buy a house now. So yeah, I kind of think Australia is in for a massive recession that just hasn't
Well, it's
happened
already
yet.
in a recession.
Right.
I mean,
But the
there's
house
no
prices
getting
haven't,
around that.
yeah, the house prices don't seem to have changed too much yet. Yeah, the house prices seems to be a totally separate economy from the rest of the economy, which is really interesting. And I think a lot of that comes from foreign purchasing.
Well,
So
there's that
the Australian,
element of it, and you've got to remember that we have central monetary authorities like central banks
yeah,
backstopping certain sectors of the economy. So
yeah,
when a
yeah,
central bank adds bundles of mortgage loans onto their balance sheet that would otherwise start decreasing in value and have a knock-on effect to the actual purchase price value, that's augmenting a natural market. Okay,
yeah,
but that's a whole nother topic for a whole nother show. I do agree with you that whether the people want to change or not, I think people will be forced to change.
yeah,
So there'll be education changes, there'll be living changes. I think in places like America, you're going to see people going from, you know, families that were in 3 different houses with up to 5 or 6 different cars, consolidating multi-generational households and reducing some of those vehicles and reducing some of the overhead costs.
yeah,
And all that stuff will be because it's necessary. They can't survive if they don't. Now, back to the financial literacy thing here is, if you lived within your means and you're making so much that you can afford your own house with 2 cars, and that's the way you
yeah,
want to live, I think that you should have that option, and it's wonderful. However, most of us are not taught that paying interest is the antagonist to wealth building. It is very difficult to build wealth
yeah.
when you are paying interest to somebody else for money you borrowed.
Completely agree.
In the faster that you aren't paying interest to somebody else and you become the person that's being paid interest or a dividend or gaining some form of yield, the faster you will be on your way to building wealth.
And this is something that I'm really struggling with at the moment. So I personally want to like pay off our place as soon as possible because once it's paid off, your life can change. You can afford to earn less money, or you can then put the money that you were paying your home loan off into other things. But do you stop living? If it takes 10, 15 years to pay off your house, do you like, ideally what I would do is just save up as much as possible, pay it off as soon as possible. But not everyone wants to live like that. Does that mean that you don't take holidays for 10, 15 years? Do you not buy the car that you want? And so personally, I would just try and save as much as possible, but that's not how really almost anyone wants to live.
Well, you know,
And I
funny.
think,
Let me stop you
especially in your
there
20s
for
and
a second,
30s. Yeah.
because if you were to take surveys of people, right,
Yep.
and don't disclose all of it up front, but just, you know, like ask a question: what are your 20-year goals really? Like, where do
Yeah.
you really want to be in 20 years from now? A lot of people are actually with very, very good um accuracy, or being, they can articulate where they want to be. And then you go, okay, great. How are you living your life now? What is
Right.
it? And the disparity between the behaviors that would allow them to create that vision in 20 years versus the activity that they're conducting, which is completely counterproductive to achieving
Yeah.
that goal.
Yeah.
That disconnection, well, it's back to, we're not taught these things.
Right.
We're not
Right.
taught basic principles like that. So, one of the interests, I have several, like, I don't want to say private clients because I am not charging a dime,
Right.
which, and that's very on purpose. But I'm working with some people, and I'm working with this one young person who has aspirations and goals, and it's so wonderful. I mean, she wants to have a business that's profitable and employs people, empowers people, and educates people. And
Oh,
so,
that's amazing.
oh yeah,
Yeah.
it's wonderful. And I ask her, okay, well, let's walk through your life. Here's the only thing I need you to do, and we'll talk next Saturday. This was on a Saturday morning. We'll talk next Saturday. Write down every single expenditure. It doesn't matter what it's for, school, business, something personal, it doesn't matter. Write it down, have this one spending journal for a week.
Yeah.
And she agreed. And we talked the next Saturday. And we went through this, and it was like, I was like, okay, cool. It was something around 35% of her expenditures were just unconscious spending. Like,
Yeah.
she never put two thoughts to buying that $7 widget thing.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And that's a conditioned behavior. That's a behavior we're taught.
And
You know what I
the
mean?
the
Subtly.
interesting thing about the interesting thing about moving from Australia to America is that both my income and my partner's income reduced significantly. So part of that was because we were like on weird visas and stuff. But yeah, I think mine reduced to a quarter of what it had been in Australia, and my partner's was about a third of what hers had been. So those are huge when you need to then, get a car and a place to live and all that sort of stuff. But it taught us to budget in a way that we've never had to worry about that before. So it's really weird when you're, in your 30s and 40s and having to budget properly when you didn't have to when you were young. And when you were younger is probably the time that you should have had to. Yeah, I wish I had budgeted better when I was in Australia when I didn't have to, because then things might be easier now. Yeah, it is amazing how much people spend. And I think especially now with like lots of like monthly payments that just come out subconsciously, but also like social media, like Instagram, for example, how many people are going on holidays for those good Instagram photos and getting into debt because of that? Like we're in a consumer society, but the way forward is to not purchase so much. It's, yeah, which necessarily help the economy. Like it is very oddly circular. And you almost have to take yourself outside of it to really succeed, which is very strange.
Well, we're very much directed to, and part of this is not ingrained. It's not taught. It does come from within. We like to be gratified. People
Yeah.
like gratification. Okay, and I won't deny that. I love gratification.
Yeah.
But so delaying my gratification, if I really want that car or that ice cream or that whatever, and I have to borrow to get it today, that's counterproductive to building wealth. If I can delay my gratification, have a dollar turn into $1.15 in 2 months, and it costs me 15 cents for the ice cream, then I can have the ice cream without touching my principal. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. So that it's all about, for me, I've had to recondition and re-educate myself to delaying gratification. Believe me, I'm going to get gratified.
Right.
You make no mistake about it. I will live an extravagant life. However, I'm not going to do it at the expense of,
Right.
running out of money
But
and
I
then
think
having nothing.
if you ask people to wait for 10 years, I think for most people that's too hard. When really, if you think about it, like 10 years is an eighth of your life, But yeah, I think if you ask people to like, let's just be a hermit for 10 years, and then you can have whatever you want after that, I think that's almost an impossible ask for most people. And that's kind of a shame. Like that's I'd love to see that kind of education in schools where it's like, you're not just being a hermit for 10 years, you are building wealth to make your life so much easier. Which is what, people say that they're working towards retirement, but they're not really.
Right. Well,
Until
it's like,
later in life where they start to panic.
will it be all it really is at its core is revaluation, right?
Right.
So for instance,
Completely agree. Yeah.
teenagers and 20-year-olds and even young 30-year-olds, if they perceived value from education, gaining
Yeah.
experience, volunteering, etc., as opposed to what kind of car I drive, what kind of clothes I wear, what kind of shiny objects are in my home. Do I have a home, or am I living in a larger family type of situation? It's what we place value on, right?
Right.
One of the things I tried to teach my son before he moved out of the house, which wasn't necessarily given to me, although my mom did turn me on to investments when I was young. She also turned me on to this concept that when you're 18, your birthday present is going to be Samsonite luggage because you are expected to leave the house. Okay.
Right.
Now, my son, I tried to teach him about compounding interest and delaying gratification. It is
That's
wonderful
great.
to want the new
Yeah.
Xbox. And as a matter of fact, if you set yourself up with some rules where investing in your future is first and the Xbox is second, and you stick to that, trust me, you'll find the energy and the motivation to hustle up the money for that Xbox. But
Right.
it should never
Yes.
be at the
Completely agree.
expense of what you're doing to create the future for you. Because although I am going to be filthy rich, don't expect me to give you my wealth.
Right.
Although I'm going to,
Um,
don't tell him. I mean, he's going to inherit everything. But I'm being the good dad, and I'm saying, hey, you're not going to ride on my coattails.
yeah,
You've
yeah, yeah.
got to learn and earn it for yourself. And for the
Because
most
the,
part,
the,
he's done a
the
good
true
job.
value in that, the true value in that is the learning. It's not the actual money at the end.
Exactly. Well, the money there's two parts. The money at the end's a good thing,
Yep.
but for
Yeah,
younger
yeah,
folks, I always hearken back to this one particular financial principle, and that is younger folks have the most valuable asset on the planet. There is no question, and it's called time. Well, what
yeah,
works best with time? Well, the principle of compounding interest.
yeah, yeah. I completely agree. Um, and I'm actually, and so I've been exploring like lots of different crypto interest type scenarios.
Uh-huh.
And so I'm not sure if you've heard of Uniswap,
I
but
have.
you have. So
Sure.
basically, like you can get compounding interest in a way by adding to the liquidity pool of a pairing of assets, because they pay you 0.3% of the fees. So if you add something into the liquidity pool, then as people are paying you get part of those fees, but those fees automatically go back into your pool. So that becomes compounding really quickly, which is incredible. But I think generally people don't see crypto as that kind of wealth building. They only concentrate on price. But for me, the price of crypto is almost the least interesting part of the entire part of it. Yeah, I really wish more people understood compounding interest, because not only does it really work for you, but it really against you when you make those bigger purchases. So if your loan has some sort of compounding interest against you, I don't think people realize how much, a $500,000 house, if you take 30 years to pay that off, you've actually paid, I don't know, 800,000 for that same house. So like if you ask the person at the front, oh, this house is going to cost you 800,000, they'll be like, no way am I going to pay that. But they
Right.
do end up paying that off really quickly. And that's why I think it's really important for people to pay off their loans as soon as possible, because you don't want that interest working against you. You want interest to work for you.
Right. No, it's really an interesting journey that I've been on, and I always use this word, this sentence, or this combination of words all the time: financial literacy, and that encompasses all of these things. So, and Rome isn't built in a day, right? Like you, earning interest on my assets is important to me. I'm not using the DeFi stuff like Uniswap or any of those kind of things, but I am. Like for instance, my Cardano is in my Daedalus wallet. I delegate it to a staking pool, and for that, I receive the mining rewards. Their staking reward. That's wonderful. I have several assets like Bitcoin and XRP that don't have that mechanism, so I use a third party like Nexo, where every single day I get a little interest back on what I'm lending them in the form of the underlying asset, which to me is the best of both worlds, because as the asset has a capital appreciation element to it, I also have the compounding element of every day the interest that I'm being paid is built off of what you call the liquidity pool, which is the total amount in my wallet. So that fraction goes up a little bit incrementally. And over time, we all know how compounding interest works. It's slow, but over time, it hits an inflection point. And it's at that inflection point that you can actually see parabolic rise. But it takes 15 years to get there.
Right.
And most people don't want to think about 15 years from now. And that's why the majority of the Western style developed countries, right? Western nations have monstrous percentages of their population that are on the brink of insolvency. Their debt from their income to the assets they hold, they're not solvent. They're on the verge of bankruptcy. Statistics, you hear this all the time. Most people couldn't get $5,000 for an emergency tomorrow. They'd have to liquidate things. Most people don't have the funding to carry themselves through a quote unquote retirement. Therefore, they're going to be forced to work into their 70s.
Yeah, and I'm seeing that.
Will there be a job? Will there be a labor force need for them?
Especially with automation.
With the simple jobs being taken away. Well, who do you think fills the simple jobs? It's the super young and the super old. Take away those jobs, and now you have no employment market for those people to go to. What do? See, people aren't thinking, they're not looking at the demographics, and they're not looking at the macroeconomics, and they're not thinking about these things, because 15 years is too far to think about. Well, guess what, folks? 15 years, guys like Adam and I will tell you, 15 years goes by like that. It goes by fast, doesn't it?
Right. And I think if people look at how things work in China, like it is almost the exact opposite. Like people in China have I think they're saving 40% of their income, which seems so much. And I think, you know, with the one-child policy that China had for a long time, dating in China is really hard. And so for a lot of young men, because there's a lot more men than women, a lot of young men don't even get dates until they have like their third apartment. Like how many 30-year-olds in the US have 3 apartments that they've, you know, that they're paying for because they wouldn't be able to date otherwise. Like it's so like the different cultures are just so different. It's amazing. I think I do unfortunately think America is in for a rough ride. And I'm personally really worried about, you know, some kind of civil unrest in the next couple of years because people are in debt. Education is really hard to get. There's not a lot of opportunity. And we can see that, you know, the top 1% is taking the majority of the wealth that's being created. Yeah, I don't know. I think potentially there's some really scary times ahead, which may help crypto adoption as people look for, you know, ways to kind of get out of the current economic system.
Well, I agree with you 100%. And one of the reasons why I'm such a big fan of what you're doing on Twitter and just your presence and who you are as a human being is because you're creating a path for your own personal wealth, but you're also like bringing other people up with you. And I think, you know,
Right.
I don't think I have a solution to change the world, but I'll tell you what, if I can help empower 5 to 10 to 15 people to who otherwise would succumb to the pitfalls, then I've done a great job. And if it's more than that, right on. And if there's
Right.
more of us doing that, then more of us will be lifted out. And then therefore those people can affect other people, you know, tell 2 friends, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So yeah, I'm a huge fan, Adam. Thank you so much for your time today. I'm looking at the clock. It's time that, boy, this conversation went by pretty quick. It's time for us to say goodbye to everybody. And you all know you can follow Crypto Adam on Twitter. His link to his Twitter account will be in the description. And from beautiful Northwest United States in Oregon and Costa Rica, ciao and pura vida.
Thanks, everyone.